writers and readers. I'm freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow, here with my weekly video about writing, editing, and the writing life. Every month, I review a different book on writing craft, and this month's book is The Fiction Writer's Handbook, a professional author's guide to writing beyond the rules by Dario Ciriello. When we talk about story structure, I mention this book as a resource for die-hard pantsers, but unlike many writing craft books in that discussion, this book has just a little bit about story structure and then a lot about a bunch of different writing topics. In my own writing, I'm more of a plotter, but I work with authors who are pantsers, and I'm always looking for resources that appeal to pantsers. The premise of this book is to dispel many of the writing rules and allow authors the freedom to write without feeling like they need to follow edicts about plotting structure and other literary advice. Then this book, ironically, gives a whole lot of recommendations that parrot other writing advice, but it doesn't call them rules. That reminded me a little bit about the scene from the Lego movie, where Emmett was first arriving at Cloud Cuckoo Land, and Princess Unikitty welcomes him with a list of things that they can't do in this town with no rules. And you're like, but wait, you're supposed to say you had no rules, and here we have all these rules. Chapter 1 is called Rules Be Damned, but then features a short list of rules that should be followed. So here are the actual rules in the Fiction Writer's Handbook. Number 1, don't switch viewpoints mid-scene unless you're an omniscient. Number 2, don't resort to a deus ex machina at the climax to save your protagonist. Number 3, don't bore the reader with lectures, trivial dialogue, excessive descriptions, or anything else. Number 4, always deal fairly with your readers and deliver on your promise to them. And then one final rule, the rule to rule them all. Don't piss off your readers. In the book's foreword by Janice Hardy, she says that Dario and Hardy both agree on 2 fundamental things. Number 1, the story's job is to engage its readers. And number 2, how a writer chooses to do that is entirely up to the writer. Dario states that his goal in writing his craft book is to inspire writers to understand the so-called writing rules, see their limitations, and help apply these tools to fiction with thought and discernment. He pitches it as an anti-save the cat, eat sheet approach. Before Dario gets to his story structure approach, he dispenses writing advice on a number of other writing topics. So I'm going to give a couple of those in this review. And so the writing topics include a definition of story versus plot, in which, here's a quote, a story is the recounting of a chain of events for entertainment and/or transmitting meaning. We tell stories to teach, amuse, and to make sense of events, including tragic and devastating ones. But plot is what happens when the writer or storyteller draws lines between and establishes causal links between them. Plot is what happens in a story, the cause and sequence of events. A story is what the novel or movie is about. I like this description, this is me, of story versus plot. Story is more of what it's about, and plot is the sequence of events that happen. And you need for both to work together for the sequence of events to be logical and prompt emotions. Next up, he had some advice on openings. For an opening to work, the writer needs to quickly do these things. Show something happening. Make the reader care about the outcome. Provide enough specific detail and descriptions so that the picture comes into sharp focus. And convince the reader that the writer knows what he or she is about and that the reader's time will be rewarded if they just keep reading. At the same time, a good writer will also be laying the foundations of scene, setting, and character. I included this to show a fair amount of overlap between this list and my CUPPAS approach to openings, which is character, unique voice, plot, promise, action, and settings. I have a different video on my YouTube channel with more details about my CUPPAS approach, plus classes at various writing events with more detail. The third thing that Dario dove into was narrative distance. My advice is to keep the narrative distance tight and not pull the camera back, taking the reader out of your viewpoint character's head unless you have a very good reason to do so. As with POV consistency, it's vital that the author remain in full control of narrative distance and viewpoint penetration at all times. That's the quote. For a book that says it's about eschewing rules, I found this recommendation rather prescriptive, but I happen to agree with tight narrative distance and consistent POV in almost all cases. Next, Dario in the Fiction Writer Handbook was talking about suspense and saying the notion that suspense is based on mystery and keeping things from the reader is generally wrong. Suspense is achieved by foreshadowing and even plainly stating that bad things are going to happen to a character for whom the reader cares about without necessarily telling them when or how. I agree with the sentiment that too many authors, especially newer authors, try to build suspense by withholding necessary facts from readers when they should be giving them 90% of the facts and letting the readers try to piece together the remaining 10%, and then hide those last clues in plain sight, obscured by misdirection and red herrings. Dario also talked about story and conflict. For a story to work, then the following basic conditions must be met. Here's a quote. The characters must be believable and well drawn enough for the reader to become invested in them. The character must have clashing goals. The character must interact as they each pursue their own goal. So we want these characters to have clashing goals, and they need to meet up with each other. They can't just be in their own silo. This is a common issue when newer authors want to write a rom-com, a cozy fantasy, a cozy mystery, that their focus is so much on their warm and cozy setting that they hate to put their lovely characters through any tension or conflict. But stories need conflict, even cozy stories. Pacing. So on pacing, the author, Dario, recommends to get rid of scenes that don't in some way advance the plot or subplots. In a genre book, there should be some sense of quickening movement. A good novel should become hard to put down at the halfway point and impossible at the 2/3 mark. It doesn't hurt to add a ticking clock or a time or day when the very bad things will happen. The protagonist doesn't achieve their goal, defeat the antagonist, whatever. If your premise, setup, conflict, and characters are all working well, pacing should take care of itself. Trust your intuition and your beta readers. That's the quote. I think this is solid advice on pacing on the macro level. On the paragraph level, pacing looks at sentence length and complexity and white space. And finally, on the topic of how much pre-planning Darrow recommends before he starts writing a novel, here's the quote. I don't know why some people have such a compulsion to be right, but I can say with certainty that you should write the way that suits you and disregard all advice to the contrary. Ignore those self-important asses who try to tell you their way is the right way. Opinion, one thing, but where the arts are concerned, assuming your way is the way is arrogance, plain and simple. Still, it's wise to begin a story with at least a rough idea of what you speak. Dario, the author, speaks from hard experience, having more than once written himself into a corner. Now he makes sure that he has a few things down on paper before embarking on a long work, which is a novel. This includes a good setup and a rough outline of the first few scenes that serve as a launch roadmap, full notes and backstory on the principal character, including psychological profiles about their deeper goals and motivations, an understanding of the flaw in the universe, the core conflict that drives the plot, and some vague notion of the development of the story, and an idea of the ending, all of which can and likely will change. Plot should be spontaneous, a hyperdynamic web of forces that develop organically as the writer's well thought out and very real characters set out to win or lose their battles against each other, themselves, or nature, as they try to reverse the flaw in the universe, which is the story's central conflict. Plot, to me, Dario, is a noun which describes a story whose events are linked by causality. The time to plot is after you've got your first draft down. That's his take. When you have 80 or 100,000 words, you need to get an overview of the whole. At this point, writing a brief summary of what happens in each chapter and each scene is something he finds vital to help see what needs doing and rewrites. This minimalistic approach, and it reminds me of the pre-work that Lisa Cron advocates in Story Genius, her book on story structure, about having the first scenes and the characters and the main conflict and some backstory in mind before starting. And I included the last part of the chapter about outlining the story after the first draft and before revising to be able to see the plot and identify the areas that need help. What does this remind me of? Oh, hey, this is step 1 in my 6-step revision process, making the big chart. So yay, this book's story structure method can work well with other resources I recommend and know and love, including my 6-step revision process, book and class, and you name it. Overall, this book, the Fiction Writing Handbook, gave an interesting overview of many writing concepts. His examples were a bit on the literary side, and there were a lot of rules for a book about breaking all the rules, but there were some useful tidbits and insights. Tune in to this YouTube channel next week when I give a mini lesson on voice, and we talk about the difference between character voice and authorial voice and tips for writing both. And then later next month, we'll spotlight another genre, but you will need to tune in to find out, ooh, suspense. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. I post new content every week about writing, editing, and the writing life. This is Miranda Darrow wishing you happy writing.